Welcome to Agile's 2025 webinar, The Realities of AI Data, Promises, Pitfalls, and Best Practices in Education Marketing. Today's session brings together Agile experts and leaders, Verlan Stevens, Mike LeClare, and Colton Meyers, to explore how AI is reshaping education marketing, what it does well, where it falls short, and how to use it responsibly. The discussion highlights Agile's practical approach to AI solutions, focusing on human-verified data to help vendors avoid common missteps and build ethical, effective campaigns.
Hello, I'm Verlan Stevens. I'm the co-founder and CIO here at Agile Education. And I'm being joined today by Mike LeClare, our Director of Data Quality and Compilation, and Colton Meyers, our lead software engineer. And we're going to talk a bit about AI, how Agile's using it, what kind of things we found, share our findings and the things that we're doing with our audience. And recently we've been asked a lot of questions about AI and its role in assisting in the collection, management, and use and understanding of the large amount of school and district information that we manage. And it's constantly changing. It's one of the real challenges in the K-12 space. We have about a 25% turnover in staff every year. We have roughly a little over 4 million people. So we have about 1 million drop off, 1 million new ones come on. So there's a constant, relatively high degree of change in this particular data set. For example, we found that AI is very good at summarizing documents and summarizing information. I've been experimenting with that over the last 2 years, looking at that as a tool to allow us to take district strategic plans, summarize those, and make them more available to our clients that would standardize them into a length and format that would make that easier for people to kind of compare and digest. And the results have been frankly amazing, that it does a really nice job of taking a document, summarizing it down into a bullet list. You can set the size of the document. It does a really good job of that most of the time. We've had some instances where it just makes stuff up, and we'll talk more about that as we get into this. But there's other things it just doesn't do very well. Between July 1st and August 1st, Agile had identified just over 1,036 new superintendents that we brought onto our file. And I decided I'm going to go ask ChatGPT the same question. Since July 1st, how many new school district superintendents are there? Can you provide me a list? And it, of course, dutifully says, of course I can provide you a list. And these are all verified sources, and says all kinds of great things. And it produces a list of 10. Well, 10 was a long ways from 1,036. And so I said, well, are there more? He said, well, yes, there's more. You didn't ask that question. Well, I said all, so I kind of thought I did, but apparently not. And it gives me another 5. And I'm still like, 15 still isn't getting us there. So, one of the things I found was it really, and I guess what I've called it, I don't know if others would as well, it's bounded versus an unbounded question. When you have a bounded question and you say, who's the school district superintendent for Denver Public Schools? Very good at giving me that information. Can you tell me about his career? Boom, it'll give you that kind of stuff. Very nice bounded questions. But where you have a very open question, which might take a tremendous amount of compute cycles, it at some point just decides, giving him enough, I'm going to quit. And so on the scale of data compilation that we do, we have just found it not to be strong enough at this point to really meet the kind of needs where we're trying to get thousands of these new superintendents on the file, and it wants to give me 10, and if I ask politely, another 5. So, I think that's an area that we've just identified that, at least as of today, it's not there in doing that. It's great at some things, not great at others. I want to open up our discussion now a little bit and bring the other guys in and see what else we want to talk about in terms of the overall kind of comparing what we do normally against what we think AI can help us with and what we think it doesn't do very well at. Mike, you want to have some comments.
Yeah, I'll kind of jump in with that bounded versus, unbounded query sort of setup. And, what we're seeing, it's not just personnel, staff, faculty. It's also the same way for schools. On our side, our ETL process includes, taking state directories, federal directories, making sure we're catching new schools and closed schools. And AI is pretty good once you can narrow it down. Hey, is this school closed? Because we ran those processes. So, okay, well, AI can kind of help out with that, but without giving it that kind of framework, it's harder to say, hey, give me all the closed schools this last year. We've closed, I think it's 600-700 schools based off of state federal files. Just in the public universe in the last couple months, AI is not going to give you 700 closed schools. It will tell me, yes, that school's closed. But even within that universe, it's still kind of tricky. The one I kind of like going back to was there's a school that closed, and I pulled it up, and AI said, it is definitely not closed. Here's a Facebook post from December. And okay, it's not on the federal, it's not on the state file. Let me click it. And you go to the Facebook page, and there was a post from December talking about their final class. It didn't say anything about closing the school, but it was the final class. There was comments about the faculty and parents and children, frustrated and sad, but it never said close. So AI said, no, it's open. Here's a post. From that kind of, hey, is this closed? But even then, it still sometimes gives you conflicting information. Right below it, the Facebook post says final class. Well, final means final. It's not open anymore. And we see that not just at the institution level, but, even to a point, like you were saying, Verlan, normally that bounded, hey, give me 10 new supers is good. It normally is. But every once in a while, just that odd one kind of works its way in, and without that human touch, sometimes it just doesn't give you the quality you're really looking for.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of value in deterministic systems a lot of the time. If you're processing a state directory or maybe some state published information about schools, that information isn't likely to rank super high when you're talking about search engine optimization and stuff. And a lot of these AI-based systems, they're hooked up to Bing or Google or some traditional search engine, right? And they're not going to find that information. OpenAI published a paper recently called Why Language Models Hallucinate. The issue with a lot of these large language models is their training and evaluation procedures reward guessing over acknowledging uncertainty. So in the absence of information or maybe the absence of I guess there's a real lack of nuanced understanding, I guess. And I think these systems often fall down in those circumstances.
The last class versus closed, that subtlety got lost. And yet for a person, that doesn't get lost. We certainly recognize that school was closed. And so curation that we do over things like that just make a difference in the overall quality. The other thing I was seeing this last week, I was working with some data, and there were a lot of references to school websites being SchoolWires. Well, SchoolWires was purchased, 3-4 years ago by Blackboard, and basically they shut it down. There's a few, I think 2 districts that I know of that are still continuing to use the non-supported platform, but virtually no one else is. But they never took most of the web pages down. And so the crawlers still find them. They still are out there. They look like a legit web page. They're just not the current. And so, those kind of things creep in where AI thinks it's legit because it doesn't have any reason to believe it's not. It's out on the web. It's available. It's a live site. It just happens that its last calendar update was 2021. It doesn't recognize 2023. It doesn't recognize that means, it's not actually a good site anymore. But a person does. We recognize it right away.
To Colton's point about the data hallucinations, if you're going to that source, if AI is going there and it starts pulling information from that, well, it's going to create inconsistencies, and it's going to possibly create the wrong story, explanation, summary, whatever you want to call it, when you're trying to get real data out of there to make some strong business decisions. That data hallucination is a real thing. And we've talked about it internally quite a bit, but on the outside, AI also, it's, as I was kind of joking around, it's my teenage son. He's smart. Maybe not quite as smart as he thinks, but he's very sure of himself sometimes. And And with AI, the way it pulls in the information, it wants to give you an answer. And if you're not focusing on the authoritative sources, then again, sometimes you get a blurred answer. You get a statement that sounds really good, but may lack that nuance that people that have been within that specific universe or domain expertise area might adjust that a little bit.
I think there's a real like kind of marketing and sales risk there as well. If you base your whole strategy based on some hallucination or half truth, and you don't realize that the underlying assumption you're making is fundamentally flawed, right? Like if you're going after 10 superintendents instead of the 1,000 that turned over, and that's a tremendous like loss in your outreach.
And I think one of the things that is really important and is really challenging is knowing when it's not telling you the truth. I knew, for instance, that 15 superintendents was not the right answer, but not everyone would. And so I think that becomes one of the biggest challenges. And even in the things it does well, the summarization of documents, I was reviewing results and I was looking at the strategic plan for Estes Park schools here in Colorado. And for whatever reason, I don't know if it thought it was too short to fill it out. It just added a bunch of bullet items into that one that wasn't in their plan. And I don't know if it took others that it thought were in other strategic plans and decided to substitute them in to make it look more like it. It was really unclear at what point it kind of went off the rails. But without knowledge of that particular document, I read through it. I was testing here, so it was under a lot of scrutiny. I was really surprised to see it just plain make up. Here, I'm just going to insert line items in your strategic plan that weren't part of their plan.
There's something to be understood here, I guess, around like operational versus capital expenditures, right? These AI tools do demo well in some circumstances, right? And it's not until you get into the reviewing the results and stuff that you realize you have a 10% or X% error rate. And as you scale that up and as the data constantly changes, as ours does, people change job titles, schools close, you're going to have a real difficulty in trusting and maintaining that data over time.
It's the maintenance of the data. On our side, we have to be really disciplined on making sure we have the newest files. We go through, if you include all our data points, probably over 1,000 files a year that we're making sure we're processing and comparing year over year to make sure there's nothing out of the ordinary. Years ago in the federal file, there were no Title I fiscal information for Los Angeles. Well, that kind of impacts some numbers if you don't understand what's going on, and you have to make sure you have the understanding and the story around it. It's not that Los Angeles didn't have any Title I. They just couldn't report it that year because they had some aspects they needed resolved. And okay, so let's make sure we understand that. Yeah, data's normally pretty good, but every state has their own little story. When we're processing over 1,000 different files from a lot of different sources, State Department of Education, census files, federal files for education, ensuring that that's presented to the clients in a very normalized way takes some time. And it doesn't only take time, it takes that domain expertise and that understanding. Michigan has a lot of different programs that a lot of people might not recognize as schools because it shares the same phone number and address, and understanding that year over year, not just at the institution level, but at the personnel level. Is it possible to be a superintendent of 3 different districts? Normally not, but it absolutely is if it groups these types of districts together. It's the institutions, it's the personnel, it's even the institutional data points, for that school and student performance data. Just, I think it was last year, maybe 2 years ago, Oklahoma adjusted the standard of what they considered proficient. So comparing year over year data like we do, well, you saw a huge gain in proficiency scores in Oklahoma. Well, because we had that understanding, it wasn't necessarily that group of students got significantly better. It was because they adjusted what they considered a proficient student. And because of that, and we have the understanding, as someone's talking to us, we can say, you have to be aware that this kind of changed years ago. There's another state that weighted students a little differently. If they're on IEPs, they didn't count as a quote unquote full student. And if they were an advanced student, then they weighted them differently, which impacted overall district proficiency scores. Looking at the raw numbers, you roll them up, there's as much as a 10 to 15 variance in some of those districts and increase proficiency scores because of those weights that they applied. And understanding that really helps out. And that's something that generally AI is not going to be able to articulate when you're asking those sorts of questions.
Yeah, I was working on our districts of distinction recently and looking at third grade reading scores over the last 4 years and trying to determine what schools and districts had the greatest performance gains in terms of third grade reading skills. And I had to throw several states out. I threw Wisconsin out. I wanted to say Georgia because same problem. They changed the test and suddenly they saw a huge jump in proficiency, but it was artificial. They changed the test so that more students were proficient. And Colorado's looking at doing the same thing. So it's not an unusual kind of circumstance where the state has complete autonomy to decide where they want to set those standards for proficiency. And if not enough students are making what they consider proficient, then they might change what the baseline is for that.
Well, we've even seen it the other way. Years ago when every state was kind of given that opportunity to administer their own tests and determine what they considered proficient and such in different subjects, you would see when they were changing those tests year over year, well, actually, at the beginning, we saw a drop because the teachers weren't familiar with how to teach for the new test. Whether right or wrong, that's a different webinar altogether. But the teachers were struggling to make sure the students understand how the tests were written. And generally you saw a little dip where it took about 2-3 years before, there wasn't any drops in proficiency, but there's a drop in the understanding because there's a new test and the way it was being administered. So, you see it swing both ways. And again, it's just understanding those little nuances when you're looking at that sort of stuff is important.
Well, and there is a lot of nuance to this data. And whether we're talking about things like regional service agencies and their impact on particular districts, or whether we're looking at CMOs with charter schools, there's a lot of subtlety in how the data is organized, arranged, and presented. And I think a lot of that gets lost. And we see even in some of the large data sets, I'll pick on Zoom Info for a minute, that when they're gathering information based on the email domain, they assume everybody works for the district because, that's the district's email domain. So, it's like working for a business. Everybody that has that email domain belongs to that business. Doesn't really work that way in the school environment. They really flatten and lose the hierarchy of here's the districts, here's the schools, here's the people that are at each of those. And, a district doesn't have 25 principals. Each school has a principal or 2 or 3, depending on the school. But, there are just subtleties to this that really make that outreach and stuff important that gets lost when you're just making gross assumptions that, hey, this data is just like a business. It's in the way it is, but in a lot of other ways, it's just not.
Well, that data governance and data logic is really, really important. One of the things when we attended the DataCon conference in Seattle about half a year ago, one of the things they were really talking about, and they jokingly kind of made fun of it, is, the definition of stupidity is doing the same thing over and expecting a different result. And, they joked around that AI crushed that. You can ask the same question 10 times and it will make sure it gives you a different answer every single time. The example we did internally was, draw a heart. We asked AI to draw a heart, something really simple. And then, we were talking about Purple Heart in the military. It drew a purple heart. Or then, we were talking about the content is really, really important, and understanding that, whether it's medical, whether it's love, whether it's Valentine's Day, those making sure there's an understanding. And it's a really basic example, but it's also very important to realize that you got to make sure you're also teaching AI accordingly.
Speaking of like model training and stuff, Anthropic, which produces Claude, came out with a paper that stated that the title was "Poisoning Attacks on LLMs Require a Near Constant Number of Poison Samples." And what's interesting about that, and kind of breaking that apart, is just 250 bad documents can introduce security vulnerabilities in large language models, pretty much regardless of model size. So from 600 million to 13 billion parameter models. there's a tremendous amount of risk currently with like integrating these AI-based systems, like let's say your CRM, right? And you're going to do that through the model context protocol, right? You do not know with, absolute certainty what's going to occur whenever that happens. And it's really difficult because these large language models are just trained off of crawled web data to understand what's in them and how they've been influenced and where they can link information. And as we expand these systems to have more tools, right, like more agent-based systems, I think that problem's only going to become worse. And we've seen like across the developer landscape, we've seen like numerous AI-based like code analysis tools actually have quite critical like remote code execution RCE vulnerabilities. And I think it's just not a solved problem, just like the hallucinations, despite state-of-the-art attempts at fixing hallucinations, fixing prompt jailbreaks, bad training input data. It's just really fundamentally not solvable with current architectures, these large language models. And there's just a tremendous amount of risk with using them with your business currently that isn't seen, obviously. Right. It's gonna show up.
It kind of complements that MIT study that was just released where, I think it's like 95% of those pilot AI programs that companies were trying out, they didn't see any benefit to them. I mean, that's 95%. Forbes had one with that they cited, I think it was an Infosys, where 5% of the C-suite personnel at these institutions where they're trying to apply some AI models, 5% saw any sort of financial gain in using, those AI models. And again, it goes back to that constant monitoring. And it's not to say there are so many things AI is good at, but again, you're seeing that 5% where they're finding success. Well, there's a reason behind that.
We talked about it a little bit earlier is authoritative sources. And that was certainly one of the things that we've seen in terms of AI is it has this fundamental kind of underlying thing that all information is the same. It doesn't weight authoritative sources. It doesn't understand that certain data sources are more authoritative than others. One of the things we see, certainly if you're using particularly ChatGPT, looking at personnel information, it tries to derive information from LinkedIn. And LinkedIn, particularly in the school environment, is rather challenging because
it's all self-maintained. And quite often, if a superintendent retires, their first effort was not to go out and update their LinkedIn profile to say, I'm no longer superintendent. So you might have 2 years later, it still says, superintendent of XYZ public schools. And it's just not true anymore. And so being able to understand, and hence we don't use LinkedIn for primary validation. It's just not reliable enough. AI doesn't understand that. It thinks that if it's published there, it's just as reliable as anything else. And I can take that for granted that that's true. And so quite often you'll see discrepancies, even in an AI result, where it says, oh, the superintendent's this, but then it has other information. And it's like it's confused as it gets in there because it has conflicting information. It doesn't know how to resolve that. It's biased to provide an answer. And I think, the creators wanted it to do that. It wanted it to be successful because that's the only way that people perceive it as being successful is if it actually answers questions.
I mean, and it's interesting too, because like if you couple Agile's data with a large language model, you can produce, brilliant results. But the basic idea is that you're rooting the context of what the LLM is operating on. Every word influences what's statistically next going to be produced, right? So if you ground it with, valid known context that has all that nuance that we put into it, then you can get great results, right? But it comes into like where in the pipeline is AI useful?
Again, Colton, to your point, that balancing, okay, I found a 20-page district plan, and in there, they're wanting to increase math scores. That's valuable, and AI is great at pulling that out. Well, then it's also nice for us to be able to provide the information. Well, their math scores were this and this last year. Historically speaking, they were these. Oh, well, that helps ground and helps really create that story. So when you're reaching out for them, you're not just kind of, you understand that it's in the district plan. AI really helped out with that. And then you have some really grounded information here with, these were their specific scores. And, my product can help out with raising those scores, and it's helpful for the kids, and everybody likes that. So
coming back a little bit again to this question of bounded and unbounded, Colton and I did quite a bit of work a couple of years ago trying to see if we could kind of do mass data compilation and collection with AI at that point. And, we had some real challenges with
documents that were not consistently formatted, and things when it had a directory and it skipped one email address, it wanted to shift everything up or whatever. And then everything was one off. And so everybody's email address was one off kind of thing. I think more recently that we can use it if we're missing a specific email address, given all the other information we have. This person's a principal at this school. Can you go retrieve an email address? I think we've got some evidence that we can get good results from, again, nice bounded, and you said it, Colton, utilizing all the information we have, and then go grab that one piece that we might be missing and supplement particular elements like that.
These AI systems are sold at a loss right now, right? In order to gain user traction. And once this bubble pops, we're going to, there is going to be a cost to getting, trying to do AI collection or anything like that with these tools, right? And the real question is, you don't know what the cost is going to be, and you don't know what the accuracy is, and if you go with us, right, there's this shared decrease in cost just because it's shared among all the clients, right?
Another aspect that kind of comes into the picture is the scalability. We talked about superintendents and how we had 1,000 new ones within that window where ChatGPT pointed out a handful. Well, that's a pretty limited universe. There's about 13,000 quote unquote regular school districts, federally defined regular school districts. And, 1,000 within that really small window had changed. Great. Well, what about the 100,000 schools, the 90,000 quote unquote federally defined regular schools, where we saw last year is about 18,000 principal changes? And then you get into the nuance, of, well, how do you make sure you get the old data off and the new data in? Well, school can't have more than one principal. Yes, they can. It's becoming more and more popular to have grade level principals in larger high schools. Well, you don't want to get rid of 3 other principals because you've created logic on your side that says you can only have one. And again, it's that understanding of that the logic and the governance that goes into those decisions, which is really, really important.
I always characterize CRMs as just a dumping ground, that it's relatively easy to get information in. You go to a trade show, you get a list of participants, you dump it in. You get, you buy a marketing list, you dump it in. And what's really hard over time is pulling the stuff back out. We've got a tool called Agile Insight where clients can upload files and run it against our database and tell them information. We routinely see clients that have 50% of the records that are on their file. Those people are no longer at that district. And so, it just proves the point that this ingestion of information is substantially easier than the maintaining it over the long haul. And getting that stuff back out, because there's nothing more frustrating for a salesperson than to pick up the phone and go to talk to somebody and, well, they left here 5 years ago, or, they died a year ago, or whatever it is. And so, that's really a waste of time, a waste of energy. And yet it's one of the real challenging problems when you're talking about data sets of the size that we manage on a daily basis.
Problem is that AI-based tool that's filling up your CRM, right, is sold at a loss, right? Most of these AI companies right now are selling their products, selling the inference on their LLMs at a loss. And, once this bubble pops for this market, you really have an unknown future cost, and coupled with that, an unknown accuracy.
Earn market share through giving it away at a loss, and then once you've established dominance, then you turn on the click meter and start charging for every query and start charging for things. It's going to be an interesting shift in the market to see these massive data centers they're building with millions and trillions of compute cycles and things. Those aren't free. They're very expensive.
It's not a one-time cost to get those up and going. Obviously there's significant expenses there. And again, we use AI on our side where it makes sense. And with a lot of the presented data we have, we get to share that cost with our clients. It's spread across a lot of different people to make sure we can ensure that they're getting the actionable data that makes the impact when they're reaching out. It just helps out.
I had seen an article recently about, and I don't remember who it was, that was actually working with a power company to spin back up 2 nuclear power plants. And I worked in the nuclear power industry after I graduated college, and when it's running, the cost of fuel is minimal, and so it actually does. But the cost of keeping it running was really high. And so that was always one of the challenges with the nuclear power plant is what can you keep the uptime to? Because when it's shut down and not generating electricity, man, it burns through cash at the same rate that it does when it's running. So, it's an interesting model, but I was surprised to hear that because, for many years we've shut down nuclear power plants, and at least in this country, and then to have a little resurgence in that space was kind of an interesting twist because they need more power to fuel these data centers.
I think also something that's interesting is like AI typically will introduce a layer of separation. A lot of times your marketing sales efforts are focused around like engagement and understanding your target audience and everything, right? And if you introduce this level of separation, like where are you missing it, right? And where are you missing understanding your market, understanding people who have a problem in the product you're trying to sell or the help you're trying to give them to make things better, right? And how much time is this wasting, essentially?
The other thing we have with the large number of clients that we have in this space is we get a lot of reported data as well. And so, one of the things, we've got clients that are reaching out all the time, and we'll get notes that says, oh, our sales rep just talked to the school secretary and that principal's not there anymore. The new one is so-and-so. Well, the website's not even updated yet. The new information's not out. We got it word of mouth right from the source, came from the school secretary. Or we'll get somebody's out of office email that says, hey, I retired a week ago. I'm no longer there. They're still on the website. I know it. I look and verify those things. And so, I think that's one of the other things that's really started to help is this shared compilation effort where our clients are reporting issues that says, oh, this person, we just got an out of office that says they retired yesterday. And so we're getting information well before any other source has that information, which I think is super cool.
To kind of go back on the scalability, it's great to kind of get those one-offs because we get to stay on top of it. And sometimes we have different sources that obviously are authoritative when they're talking to that person. But, during our prime, updating time, which is right about now, we're making anywhere from 300 to 600,000 updates to personnel a week. That's, that in that 600,000 universe, that's people that same role, we verified them again, or somebody completely new, or a new title for a new person. That's a significant outlay week over week. And again, AI is really good at, hey, what about this one? That scalability right now seems a little difficult.
We don't see certainly nothing in those trends are reversing. We saw this last 12 months, the highest rate of superintendent turnover we've ever seen, running about between 23 and 24%. It's really just a massive number. And we added new superintendents every week during the last year. So 52 weeks, there was at least one, quite often many more than that every week. And so there's a constant shift and change in what's going on in this environment. And those are important touch points. When a superintendent leaves a district, if that's one of your clients, you've got to make sure you're in contact so they know the value that you're bringing. Vice versa, maybe they're looking to clean house and they don't like the products the last guy chose, and they're looking to boot them out and make changes. So they're important sales inflection points is those kind of changes. And so being on top of that level of change I think is really critical for our clients and really allows you to be on top of that. But, we saw certain states where we're seeing nearly a 50% turnover in superintendents. It's just crazy numbers.
We saw some high ones. Yeah, I think they're, mid-30s.
Utah was 39%.
Yeah, there are some that were a little high, and then even, breaking it out into the size of the districts, we saw some greater volatility there as well. But yeah, and again, it all just kind of depends on the state, depends on the universe. But again, that's supers. It's a relatively small universe. It's not the people in charge of curriculum. It's not the staff at the school that has an investment plan. It's not, the universe is pretty large. And again, with the mechanisms we have in place, it's that balancing act of using AI where it makes sense, where it complements our existing logic and data governance, and, the areas that it doesn't make as much sense in that compilation. It's not quite there yet.
So just to kind of wrap up, and this will be a topic that we revisit. I have no doubt that we'll come back and have other updates and other information to share. We're certainly looking at AI and a number of uses in our own business, and we're getting some super exciting results. So I do think that, there will be opportunity for us to share not only our insights into this area around using it for data compilation, but also in other areas where we think that it can yield significant benefit to our clients. And, we're certainly very optimistic on what we might be able to use it for in the future. But if I come back and I look at, would I buy information from Agile, or would I just have AI scrape it? I think there's a number of things you have to ask is domain expertise. Does your AI model really have the domain expertise that you need to run your business off of? And at least our experience is that isn't yet the case. It just doesn't understand the nuances to a degree that people that have the domain expertise do. Questions on scalability. I think we have a lot of questions around scalability that, being able to find 10 new superintendents is very different than the 3,000 that we found last year. It's just a huge delta there. And so I think that's going to be really one of the challenges. And we talk about, intrinsically, the whole idea of authoritative sources. When you crawl the entire internet as your base of knowledge and continue to, you don't understand the subtleties of an authoritative source versus a non-authoritative source, and old pages versus a newer page and things. So there's still a lot of questions around some of those kind of areas. Lack of trust as to what the results are. Colton talked about the costs, the unknown cost in the future. And I think that's a really, I'm a businessman. That's what I do here. And, entering into a model where I don't know what the cost is going to be in the future, are a pretty good idea. That could be pretty daunting, where you're signing up to the future of your company and with an undetermined possible future cost to it. I think that's certainly a consideration that people need to be thinking about in terms of the overall use. Here at Agile, we really appreciate you taking the time to listen to this webinar. We hope you made it all the way through to the end and didn't bail on us early. We're a group of people that always works very hard to, help our clients succeed. And we really want the opportunity to earn your business. So, please, if you have any questions, certainly reach out to anybody here on the Agile team, see if you can. And you're always welcome to engage with us and ask questions, and we will give you our, honest opinion on various topics and be able to do anything we can to help you and help your business grow and succeed.
Thank you for joining Agile's 2025 webinar, The Realities of AI Data on How AI Can Support, but Not Replace, Trusted, Human-Verified Data in Education Marketing. For more resources and to learn how Agile helps organizations scale with confidence, see the materials provided after this session. Thank you for watching.